Good evening. We are going to continue now on Daf Sadi Aleph Amud Aleph. This actually is another one of those occasional Gemaras that you come across that show you that Chazal had a sense of humor. Amar le'ahu mina leGevihuh ben Pesisa. This non-believer said to Gevihuh ben Pesisa, "Vay lechon chaya vaya. Woe to you, you guilty people. The Amrisun, you say, Mesi Chayin, that those who are dead will come to life. The Chayin Mesi, if we see that those who are alive die, the Mesi Chayin, you really think that those who are dead can come back to life? It's actually interesting that this min referred to him as guilty. Vailachon Chayavaya. Woe to you, you guilty people. It's not really very clear. You want to say that it's illogical that you believe in Tchias HaMesim, okay. Why he felt necessary to try to guilt him for that, I'm not sure. I was thinking it's possible that he felt that since he didn't believe in the idea of Tchias HaMesim and the resurrection of the dead, maybe he felt that educating people and telling them about such a thing was giving people false hope. And it's a pretty horrible thing to give people false hope. So perhaps that's why he chose the word chayavaya to apply to those who believe. Now, this min was talking to Gevihuh ben Pesisa. Gevihuh ben Pesisa is a person who lived around the time of Alexander the Great, as we'll see later on in the Gemara. And there are a number of stories about him that surround Alexander the Great. One such story, which is not in our Gemara here, was that Alexander the Great wanted to see the Beis Hamikdash and go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and Gevihuh ben Pesisa is the one who gave him a tour, and he convinced Alexander the Great that rather than demand that a statue of himself be placed in the Beis Hamikdash, he should take a more lasting form of having his name remembered by a promise that all of the children being born to Kohanim that year would be named Alexander. The other thing about Gevihuh ben Pesisa, as we will see later on in the Gemara, is that he was a hunchback. So Amarle, Gevihuh ben Pesisa responded to this non-believer, Vai lechon chayavaya. Woe to you, you guilty person. The Amrisun Mesi lo chayin. You're saying that the dead won't come back to life? Well, that's not logical. If the lo havu chayi, if those people who were never in existence can come into life, the havi chayi, those who are already alive, lo kolshkein, how much more so that they can come back to life. That might support the way I was reading the earlier Gemara in our last class, that the whole point was that there is always something remaining, some spiritual flicker from someone who had been alive, and that's where the Tchias HaMesim comes from. Amar Lei, so the min said back to him, Chayavaya Karisli? You're calling me a guilty person? Ika imna, if I was standing, ba'itna bach, I would kick you, upashitna la'akmuseich minach. I kick you so hard that I would straighten out your hunchback. Amarle, so Gevihuh ben Pesisa answered him, Imata osakain, if you would do this, Rofe uman tikra, you'd be called an expert doctor. Uschar harbe titol, you can make a lot of money. So clearly this non-believer was getting quite upset and incensed. And so Gevihuh ben Pesisa used some humor to deflect his answer. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a brisa, Be'esrim va'arba ben Nisan, on the 24th of Nisan, is natilu di musna'i mi Yehuda. Those people who were arguing and making claims were removed from Yehuda, from Judea, umi Yerushalayim. What happened? Kishaba'u b'nei Afrikaya lodun im Yisrael. People from Afrikaya came and filed suit with the Jewish people, lifnei Alexandrus Mokdan, before Alexander the Macedonian. Amrulo, they said to him, Eretz Canaan shalanuhu, the land of Canaan is ours. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says very clearly, Eretz Canaan l'gvuloseha. Last week's parsha, the land of Canaan in its borders. Ukanan avuhon dahanu inshuhavi. And Canaan was the ancestor of these people. Canaan was our ancestor. It's a little bit unclear. I know the Gemara does use the word Afrikaya, which certainly our initial thought would be that it means people from Africa. There are other midrashim who mention that some of the inhabitants of Canaan ran away to Africa, but it's not so clear in some of the commentaries whether to understand it that it means Africa, as we would assume, or whether it means that these were people from someplace else. So Amaluhu Gevihuh ben Pesisa lechachamim. Gevihuh ben Pesisa said to the other sages, Tunuli Rishus, give me permission, ve'elech ve'adun imahem, let me go and debate with them, lifnei Alexandrus Mokdan, in front of Alexander the Macedonian. Im yinatzchuni, if they end up winning over me in the court case, Imru, then you can say, Hedyot Shabanu Nitzachdem. Some simpleton among us you beat. Because the fact, as we mentioned earlier, he was a hunchback, so people generally didn't take him very seriously. So he was using his own self-deprecation over here to improve the position of Klal Yisrael in this lawsuit. But if I am victorious over them in the lawsuit, Imru lahem, tell them, Torahs Moshe nitzachtechem, that it's the Torah of Moshe that overcame you in the lawsuit. So apparently the other sages didn't really feel that they had a very strong answer. Now, let me make this clear. It doesn't mean that the other sages did not believe that Klal Yisrael had the right to Eretz Yisrael. Certainly they believed that. The issue was that they needed an argument that was going to convince Alexander the Great. And they weren't sure what it was that they could or should say that Alexander the Great would agree with them. Now, a lot of the Mefarshim ask that why didn't they simply say, what was Alexander the Great doing? He was marching around the world and capturing land. And every time he was victorious in war, he quite clearly considered the land that he captured to be part of his empire. He wasn't really concerned about who lived there 1,000 years beforehand. He didn't even care about who lived there, 1,000 days beforehand. So why didn't the Jewish people simply say to Alexander, we came with our army, we captured the land's ours? So I saw that many of the Mefarshim want to explain that because in those days, Klal Yisrael had a reputation of being a very moral people. And even though conquest by war was considered to be legally valid, but it perhaps didn't pass the 100% morality test. So therefore, they were trying to come up with a better answer. And again, as we said, at least one that would certainly manage to convince Alexander the Great. So Nastilo Rishus, the other rabbis, permitted Gevihuh ben Pesisa to take the lead in responding to these people. V'holach v'don imohem. And he went and discussed with them. Amar lehem, he said to them, Mehechen atem meviim raya. Where's your proof that the land of Israel should be yours? Amrulo min Torah. So they said, our proof comes from the Torah. In other words, they were trying to show that the Jews were hypocrites, at least in their opinion, because they felt that the Torah supported their claim to the land of Israel. But now he had them exactly where he wanted them. I'm just going to warn you that the next couple of lines of the Gemara are not exactly very politically correct nowadays. So Amar Lehen, Gevihuh ben Pesisa responded, Afani lo avi lechem raya ela min haTorah. I am also going to use the Torah to prove that your argument is wrong. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, after Noach came out of the teva, out of the ark, Vayomer, he said, Orur Canaan, he cursed his grandson Canaan, Eved avodim yeh lo ochiv. He should be a slave to his brothers. So you want to claim the land of Canaan is yours, but that very same Torah also says that you are a slave to your brothers. So Eved shekana nechasim, if a slave acquires property, Eved lemi, who owns the slave? Unechasim lemi, and who owns the property? Below, not only that, Sharei Kama Shanim, it's already many years, Shalo Avad Tunu, that you didn't serve us. So you owe us the servitude of many years. Amr Lahem Alexandrus Malka, so King Alexander said, Hachziru lo tshuva, you better give him a good answer. Amr lo, they said to Alexander, Tnu lanu zman shlosha yamim, give us 3 days to come up with an answer. Nasan lahem zman, he gave them time. Badku v'lo matzu tshuva, they searched and could not find a response. Miyad barchu, they immediately ran away from Eretz Yisrael. V'hinichu sadoseyen k'shehen zruos, and they left their fields while they are planted. Ukramehem, and their vineyards, kishehin netuos, also when they were planted. V'osa shana shviyas haisa, and that year was Shemitah. It was the sabbatical year. So the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael had not planted anything. And now all of a sudden they had all of these fields and vineyards that had been planted by these people who had now run away and abandoned their fields and vineyards. And it was food for the Jewish people in a year when they were not planting. Thank you and good evening.